Today I'm going to be doing something a little different. For Romeo and Juliet, we just finished Act 1 and Act 2, and so I was thinking as a way of studying, I'm going to be making this video as one of the ways to try to remember what happened in Act 1 and in Act 2 for the quiz that's coming up. So just reading off of the notes that were given. Of course, mine are going to be a little different because you know, they're my perspective, but it should be pretty much the same thing. So in the prologue, the characters would be the chorus. The chorus tells the audience about two enemies who have been fighting for years, a pair of lovers who are doomed, and how their deaths will be the only thing that will end the fighting between their two families. The problem would be that the chorus presents us with the entire plot of the play, and we know that it's going to be a tragedy. It's not going to end well. And then they say that you mean they're going to die to bring peace. And the audience knows that they're going to now see how the story unfolds. So in scene 1, it takes place in Verona, which is a public place. The characters would be Samson, Gregory, Abram, Tybalt, Benvolio, Capulet, Lady Capulet, the Prince, Montague, Lady Montague, and Romeo. So the action would be a fight between the Montagues and the Capulets. The Prince breaks up the fight. Benvolio and so Montague and Lady Montague ask Benvolio to talk to Romeo about how he's feeling. And this is a problem. This scene is a problem because the Capulets and the Montagues are clearly fighting for no reason. And Romeo is upset about Rosaline. Scene 2 takes place in a street, and the characters are Capulet, Paris, Benvolio, Romeo, the serving man. That's it. The action would be Capulet and Paris talk about marriage to Juliet. Romeo and Benvolio decide to go to the Capulet party. This scene is pretty much a problem because the Capulets and the Montagues hate each other. So if Romeo and Benvolio decide to go to the party, that's not going to be taken well. And also, Juliet doesn't seem thrilled to get married because she's not quite 14 yet. Capulet worries that she's going to have some developmental issues if she gets married too soon. Scene 3 takes place in a room of the Capulets' house. The characters are Lady Capulet, the nurse, Juliet, and the serving man. So the action would be Lady Capulet, the nurse, and Juliet talk about Juliet getting married to Paris. This is a problem because Juliet isn't totally happy to be married. She's only doing this because her parents want her to. And she doesn't know if she wants to with Paris. Scene 4 takes place on the street. The characters are Romeo, Benvolio, and Mercutio. So the action would be Romeo, Benvolio, and Mercutio talk about going to the party. Mercutio goes on kind of a rant about the fairy queen Mab, and Romeo predicts his death. Romeo is still depressed about Rosaline in this scene. This is a problem because they're crashing the party, and that's not going to be taken well due to their family feuds. And Romeo is going to die because of it, as he predicts in this scene. Scene 5 takes place in the hall in Capulet's house, so this is the party. The characters would be Juliet, Romeo, Capulet, Tybalt, and the nurse. So in this scene, Romeo goes to the party, everyone dances. Romeo and Juliet meet someone, sing and they kiss and dance together. Then Tybalt recognizes Romeo and threatens him. So this scene is kind of a problem and a solution because Romeo's stopped worrying about Rosaline when he meets Juliet, so that's kind of good. They shouldn't be falling in love though, so that's kind of an issue. And Tybalt is angry that Romeo is at the party, so that's a problem too. Yeah, the prediction, that doesn't really help with anything. Now for the elements, scene. So there's an extended metaphor when Lady Capulet tells Juliet that Paris is a book and Juliet could be his cover. This is a little superficial, but and then let's see, an oxymoron is used when Romeo says, "Oh, heavy lightness." So an example of foreshadowing is when Romeo predicts his death at the ball. Imagery is used when he says, her colors of moonshine's watery beams. This is Mercutio, he says that. Personification is used in the quote, she's a fairy's midwife and becomes comes in a shape no bigger than a agate stone. That's describing Queen Mab because she's a fairy and not a person. I don't know if it's the best example, but that was what happened in our class. So next, we're on Act 2. So it starts out with a prologue. The characters for the prologue are obviously the chorus. The action, there's not really much. The program just says what's going to happen, what has happened in the scene. Overall, it presents a problem because Romeo and Juliet know that their families are enemies, but they're in love anyways. Scene 1, it takes place in a lane by the wall of the Capulet orchard. The characters are Benvolio and Mercutio. That's the action. Benvolio and Mercutio look for Romeo. They think he's with Rosaline, and they figure he doesn't really want to be found. This is a problem because Romeo kind of ditches his friends to be with Juliet. And as I've stated many times, it's not an okay thing with their families. So scene 2 takes place in Capulet's orchard. The characters would be Romeo and Juliet. They have the famous balcony scene, and Romeo and Juliet decide that they declare their love and they decide they want to get married. This is overall a solution. I mean, in the big picture, it's kind of not, but like in the short term, they're happy about it. And they kind of forget their parents' feud and they decide to get married. Scene 3 takes place in Friar Lawrence's cell. The characters would be Friar Lawrence and Romeo. As for the action, Romeo asks Friar Lawrence to marry him and Juliet. Friar Lawrence agrees because it could end their family's feud, I guess you'd say. This is overall solution because Romeo and Juliet are getting married. Scene 4 takes place in the street. The characters would be Benvolio, Mercutio, the nurse, and Romeo. The action would be Benvolio and Mercutio are annoyed that Romeo ditched them, and they tease him. The nurse looks for Romeo and says their wedding is on to Juliet. This is a solution because the wedding is on and the nurse tells Juliet the good news. Scene 5 takes place in Capulet's orchard. The characters would be Juliet and the nurse. In this scene, Juliet waits for the nurse. The nurse teases her, but eventually tells her that they're going to have a wedding. This is a solution because there's going to be a wedding, and Juliet will marry Romeo. Scene 6 takes place in Friar Lawrence's cell. The characters will be Friar Lawrence, Juliet, and Romeo. So Friar Lawrence gives a couple advice. They go off to get married. This is a solution because they're getting married. Now, as for literary elements. Oh, I have to say the quotes from last page. I'll do that later. So literary elements for Act 2. There's foreshadowing when he says, I shall kill thee with much cherishing. That was Juliet to Romeo. And she says, these violent delights have violent ends. That's another foreshadowing because they're going to have a violent end when they die. The metaphor in here would be, it is the east and Juliet is the sun. Pretty sure Romeo says that. Imagery, when they talk about like light and dark, her eyes in heaven would through the airy region stream so bright that birds would sing and think it were not night. So there's some rhyme there too. Personification is used in the quote, arise fair sun and kill the jealous moon, because I mean, obviously, it's an object the sun isn't really killing anyone, like, sentiently. Quote here would be, O Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo, art thou, Romeo? Deny thy father and refuse thy name. That's obviously Juliet. And the significance would be Juliet wants Romeo to stop being a Montague so they can get married. Another quote would be, virtue itself turns to vice, being misapplied by Friar Lawrence. This is foreshadowing the fact that their love, which is considered a virtue, is eventually going to lead to their death, which is not a good thing. Another quote would be, these violent delights have violent ends, by Friar Lawrence, and this is an example of foreshadowing. As for the quotes that I forgot to mention on Act 1, one quote would be, if you disturb our streets again, your lives shall pay the forfeit of the peace. That's the prince. This is foreshadowing because Romeo and Juliet are going to die because of their family's feud. Another quote would be in Act 1, some consequence, yet hanging in the stars, shall bitterly begin in this fearful date with this night's revels. That's by Romeo. And this is foreshadowing that Romeo will die as a result of of going to the party. Another quote would be, my only loves from my only hate, too early seen unknown and known too late. That's by Juliet. It shows that Juliet has fallen in love with Romeo, not knowing that he was a Montague. So, I hope this helped. Thanks.